Hello and welcome to the Career Success Podcast. I'm Jason Connolly. If you're a regular listener, it's great to have you back. If you're new, welcome to the show. In this series every week, we speak to the biggest names in business all across the globe. We talk about their career stories, the lessons learned, how they overcome challenges, and what success habits they practice. Practical advice to help you in your career. If you have a passion for business, then this is the podcast for you. In this episode, I'm joined by Dominic Monkhouse from the New Forrest. Dominic is a proven architect of business growth. He scaled two UK technology service firms from 0 to 30 million a year in less than 5 years. He now helps aspirational business leaders achieve their potential, working to provide clients and audiences with business tips at work today and give as many unfair advantages as possible. Dominic is a proven architect of business growth. As managing director, he headed up teams that scaled two UK technology service firms from 0 to 30 million a year in less than 5 years. At Rackspace in Uxbridge and Peer hosting in Southampton, with Peer achieving 200 million globally. Sandwiched between these roles, Sandwiched between these roles is a sensational turnaround at IT Lab, taking them from 90 days to oblivion and a monthly loss of 65,000 to profitable, later selling for 65 million. And learned as much as a purveyor of beautiful knickers and chickens. We'll talk about that soon. Dominic hosts a weekly podcast, The Melting Pot, and shares nuggets of value on his subjectively non-crap newsletter, including the weekly blog where he curates the best articles on all things scaling up. As a regular public speaker, Dominic gives talks on creating growth and building great places to work. Dominic, thanks for joining me on this episode.
Jason, it's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. So I've got so much I want to talk to you about. But first of all, tell us about you and kind of how it all got started, because some of these numbers in this introduction are absolutely sensational. But before we go into that, tell us about your career.
Until later on in my career, there was really not much connection between one job and the next, except I changed jobs quite frequently. I did agriculture at Newcastle University, and then I joined M&S as a graduate trainee, the purveyor of fine knickers and chickens, and travelled around the country. Travelled around the country working for them. Then I went around the world for a few years, ended up in Australia, got a job there, came back and got a job working for Glaxo Wellcome, selling drugs in Yorkshire. And so, there's some good blue chip management training, sales training that I got there. A really good lesson in how to do, some good systems and some good processes from those large companies. But I knew that I didn't really want to work in a company like that, because I remember at M&S, the manager of Liverpool, which at the time was turning over sort of 80-90 million pounds a year, and he said, it's only taken me 16 years to get from trainee to here. And I'm thinking, I can't do this job for 16 years, I'll kill myself. So then I ended up working in the UK's largest seller of gold and diamond jewelry, because drugs is great, but the GP that you're selling to or the hospital doctor that you're selling to promises to use your product, but there's no sale. So I thought, well, I'll do something more commercial. So gold and diamond jewelry I got into up in Leeds, because I was in Yorkshire. But you know what? I just had and I thought you could sell anything. I then realized you can only sell things that you like or have an affinity with. And I had no affinity whatsoever with jewelry. And also I had 12 national accounts and I didn't really like any of them either. So it was a product I didn't like selling to customers that I didn't like. So I thought I better stop doing that. So I got back into IT and then found myself at Rackspace as the managing director.
And it's interesting you say that, because working in sales myself, I think I've got to sell something I believe in, and I agree with you there. I'm not a jewelry person, but I think you've got to speak the same language as the audience you're trying to sell to, and maybe that's where that disconnect was. So tell us what are Rackspace, because I've never come across them myself.
Well, so I joined there a couple of weeks after 9/11. And it was, back then there were probably a few million people in the UK that were on the internet. Back then in 2001, it was a lot of dial-up modems and people were just starting to build websites. And we hosted websites we hosted mission critical stuff on computers in our air-conditioned sheds. And during the time I was there, we went from a couple of hundred people around the world to several thousand. And by the time I left, after about 5 years, we were hosting about 2% of the internet in the world lived in our data centers. And
Wow.
that business went on to be the number one provider of managed services to business critical IT infrastructure.
It sounds, I'm not kind of taking away from what you did there, but it sounded like you got in very much the right place at the right time.
Lucky.
Of a boom.
Yes.
I remember the days of dial-up all too well. But how did you? It must have been trying to keep up with, the demand. It must have been, an incredible scaling operation, and even to keep finance up for something like that.
I was definitely lucky getting into a booming market, and Rackspace, as a company, we were lucky because our competitors kept getting bought. At the time, when we started, in the UK, the big boys were BT and Cable and Wireless and Colt, and they had, we had a couple of £100,000 of turnover, and they had like 12 million and 6 million and 3 million, and it just seemed impossible that we would ever catch them, and yet we did. We caught them and accelerated past them because they saw themselves as telcos, and the telco industry sees customer service as a cost. So they're almost in the denial of service business. Whereas we were much more, I suppose, we used to have this terrible mission statement that talked about being the number one supplier of something in some industry to some type of customers. And in the end, we scrapped that and we just said, we're going to be the Ritz-Carlton of IT services.
Oh, I love that.
And that was it. We were the expensive. Nobody was ever more expensive than we were. We were the expensive but good, great service provider.
Don't even get me started, Dominic, on BT. I've just done an office relocation, and to say customer service, I don't think it's improved now. However, 20 years on, I think it's still an overhead to them now. How did you get Rackspace to where it was then? How did you even get to that place where you were competing with such a big name? Was it the changing of the philosophy and really understanding what you stood for? What was key to the success?
I think, I was running the UK bit of a US business, and so it was taking the technology skill we had in the US and the services skills and the marketing skills in the UK, and we just, we found that we were growing by word of mouth, and so our customers were finding themselves at barbecues or down the pub or out for dinner, and people were talking about, I need a website, but the supplier I've got is rubbish. And people would say, oh, I host with Rackspace. And people were proud, I guess almost a little bit smug, that they were customers of ours. And we just had a great reputation, which we worked hard at. One of the things is there was a guy called Fred Reichelt who wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review about a thing that's come to be called Net Promoter Score, which I rolled out at Rackspace. And that was that what you're trying to do is you're trying to give customers a service which is so good that if you ask the question, Jason, would you recommend Dominic Monkhouse to your friends or colleagues, that you would give a 9 or a 10? And that's what we did. We worked hard so that our customers would give us a 9 and a 10. And that meant when they found themselves in the pub, out for dinner, at a barbecue, they would tell people that they were customers of ours and that we were amazing.
I've always thought it's a misconception that people buy based on price. They don't. They buy based on value and product. And, I think this is where a lot of companies go wrong. I think, know your offering. And then, once you know your offering and where you sit, then own it. There's
a great book called Somebody's Going to Be the Most Expensive. It May as Well Be You. And I do think that it's much easier. It's really hard to be the cheapest. It's much easier to pick a customer group and be the most expensive. And then people ask you to justify why you're the most expensive, which is a much better conversation to be had than why are you cheaper than somebody else? Because immediately you think I've taken something away and it's not as good. So
yeah, I learned that lesson years, kind of very soon on into even what I'm doing now in legal recruitment. We're definitely not the cheapest. Actually, we're so far from. Yeah, why am I saying we're definitely not the cheapest? I should be saying it the other way around. We are expensive, but you get what you pay for. Why did you leave Rackspace after 5 years? Why did you not stay on longer?
I fell out with a CEO. There was a day about a year before I parted company with the business, and he said, Dom, you've had more days holiday this year than you've had more weeks holiday this year than I've had days. And I said, "Oh, that's okay. I can help you fix that." And he said, "All right, brilliant. What should we do?" And I said, "Mate, you've got to get a hobby." And so there was definitely this Protestant work ethic. And, I was 2 hours away from work. So I'd get up at 5, I'd be in the car, I'd be at the office after a 2-hour drive, 100 miles down from Birmingham. And I did that for five years. And so when I did get the chance to take time off, I took time off. and most of my executive colleagues in the US would take a week's holiday or a weekend's holiday, and they'd carry on working. And my view has always been, if I'm on holiday, I'm on holiday. If I'm at work, I'll give 100%. And if I'm on holiday, I'll give 100% of my holiday.
That's so important, though. That's where so many people go wrong. And even I've been guilty of it and got myself really unwell, because you take a week off, you're constantly glued to your phone, and you do get yourself unwell. I made myself incredibly unwell
So we had a disagreement about that, and then we found ourselves disagreeing about a number of other things. So I guess like a disconnect on values, and I left and went on to IT Lab to help Sebastian Gray turn that round.
IT Lab, when you joined them, 90 days to oblivion, and a monthly loss of, not a small figure, 65,000. Later selling it for 65 million. What was the appeal about this business?
What happened is I said I'd been out of Rackspace for a little while, and there was one day I went to Tesco's in the afternoon. And like that was as much. I got sort of listless, and we'd had some good weather, but everybody else had jobs. And so I went to Tesco's, and I came back from Tesco's, and I hadn't bought what I'd gone for, and I just said, I've got to get a job. So I emailed a few people and said, look, do you want me to come and do a day a week for you? And 5 people came back and said yes, and one of them was Sebastian. And so I started off doing sort of a day a week for 5 different firms, one of which was IT Lab. And after and I really enjoyed my day there, and I enjoyed my days less at other places. So in the end, he said, look, why don't you just come and run it for me, be the managing director? So I said, all right. I turned up. And at that point, because beforehand I'd been doing some consulting around sales and marketing, and then I became the MD, and it's then that I looked at the accounts, and it's like, we've got a £65,000 loss. So we've got enough money for 3 months, otherwise we're all out of work. And what had happened is the global financial crisis had hit small businesses in London, and the business turnover had gone from 8 million to 5 million pretty much overnight. All discretionary spend. Nobody was buying printers or PCs. Nobody was spending any money. Everyone was battening down the hatches, and the company just didn't have enough recurring revenue to cover its cost base. So we said, right, well, we've got to look for where the holes are in the bucket, and we found about £20,000 worth of broadband connectivity that our customers had cancelled, that we hadn't cancelled on our suppliers. So there was that, and some people thought it sounded terrible when I told the team that we had 90 days to live. So some people quit, and that was good. That saved us some salaries. And then we went on a massive, let's reinvent the business. What would it look like if we did it properly? I went out and spoke to our clients, or Sebastian and I went and spoke to clients. We lost one, but everybody else was prepared to take a 50% 50% cost increase. And we went looking for sales opportunities, and 90 days later, we'd got to break even, and the business survived. And I did 2 years there. Helped get it to the point where it was making money, and that we reimagined the service, and we got that fixed and won some good clients. We picked up the likes of Cafe Nero and Capgemini as clients, which were much bigger, more profitable than the business had previously done. But it was a family business, and I wasn't family. So a Canadian company came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, would I build a competitor to Rackspace for them? And so at the time, my wife and I were both working for separate IT businesses in Farringdon and living in Clerkenwell and walking to work. But we'd bought a place on the coast in Lymington in the New Forest. And we were down there most weekends. And it was like every time you went back on a Sunday, it was like, what a shame there aren't any proper jobs down here. And then, so Pier 1 said, would you do it for me? And I said, well, actually, my wife has all the good ideas in our lives. So she said, only say yes if they'll let us put it in Southampton. So I said, I'll take the job. Can we put it in Southampton? And they said, we don't care where you put it. So we got to build a business in Southampton, live in Lymington, get out of London, spend all our time in the New Forest instead of just weekends. And so that was great.
And achievement as well, the journey you went on there, achieving 200 million globally.
Yeah. So, that was, I arrived, I think we were $90 million globally when I arrived, and we were zero in the UK. And then we got the UK to about £30 million of run rate by the time I left, built the greenest data center in the country, created 120 fantastic jobs down on the South Coast, and built a great business. And then we sold it in 2013, and I left in 2014. It was our new owners turned up, and it was, if you could imagine, I don't know, your worst nightmare, like the people from The Office turn up. They've left you alone. They've left you alone for a year, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in some sitcom, but it's not funny. So, 3 CEOs in 6 months, and I decided my daughter was due to be born. She's now 7. She's 7 in a couple of weeks. So it was May. It's about now, May the 3rd or May the 4th or something like that. 2014, I left and started doing something instead. Started helping other people take the mystery out of growth.
And how interesting that you had that time at Rackspace. This opportunity came along, obviously. No limits on annual leave. I'm guessing with Peer 1, they were all too happy to take you into the business.
Yeah, totally. It was, and that was one of the things I came back. I went to Vancouver to meet them and spend a bit of time with them before I took the job offer. And I said, look, I'm going to comparing Texas to Canada. In Canada, these guys swear, take time off, and drink. 3 things that they weren't happy about doing in Texas. So it felt like it was a much better fit.
Right. Well, culture is everything, and frankly, I think you articulated your career story so well, and it's really, really interesting. I could spend a whole hour just talking about the ins and outs of what you've done. But what you do now is you have the management lab, and you help other companies kind of, I guess, using your expertise, go on this kind of journey of growth with you.
Exactly. When I look back, the financials at Peer 1 and Rackspace were great, but the things that really make the hairs on the back of my neck stand up are the employees that went on to do amazing things, or the people who sort of knocked on the door and we could have ignored, but we let them in, and they had an amazing career. Early on, one of the guy who went on to run our network in the UK, had dropped out of uni partway through his computer science degree and was running a pub, and nobody would give him a job because he didn't have a qualification. But he was, he worked like 24 hours a day, 7 days a week when we gave him a job, because he was so keen and committed. Yeah, and there was a guy who wrote his CV. I mean, you're in recruitment, you love this, right? It was like he'd taken 3 pages out of a school notebook from when he was 8, and he'd written in biro a covering letter, and then he'd handwritten his CV in biro. And it's like, you just think, how do you get to be a grown up and not think that was a strange way to submit a CV? So he'd send it in, and one of our guys, Mike Duncan, interviewed him, and Mike rang me up and he said, look, can you have a chat with this guy? He's just been in for an interview. And, at the end of the interview, I said, have you got anything to say? And he said, yes. He said, I know you're not going to hire me because I don't have the skills and the qualifications, but can I come and work for free for you at the weekends so that in 6 months I do, and then you can hire me?
I love that kind of attitude.
Mike said, let me send him up for you to have a chat. So this guy turned up, and we're sitting in a conference room, and he's never sat in front of a managing director before, so he's almost mute. His legs going at 1,000 miles an hour under the table, and he can't speak to me. So I said, look, do you play pool? And he said, yeah, sure. So we cracked open a couple of beers, and we jumped on the pool table in the office, and I broke and he cleared. And because he was doing something else, he could speak. So at the end, I chatted to him for a bit, and I rang Mike and I said, look, I've hired him. He said, I didn't say hire him. I just said, talk to him. Anyway, but he went on to be the number 1 engineer in the data center. And then he came out and he ended up being one of the guys who was part of our internal IT security team. And so he went from having a job on basically, I don't know, I think £16,000 a year, working for Vodafone in one of their data centers, to having a better job with us, and then having a career. And I think he was on, it might have been on £40,000 or £50,000 a year by the time I left. And it's just that,
it's being able to, and I think this is where so many businesses go wrong. And I've seen it myself. It's quite funny actually. The people that I employ with degree are actually most of the people that build great money, or the people that have really had the success in my own business, have been people that have been real kind of unconventional hires. But I think that's where, if you've got an eye for being able to spot talent doesn't always come along in the conventional way. And I hope the person that I'm talking about doesn't potentially listen to this, but one of the times I rocked up to an interview at a hotel, and I got there and the guy said, "Oh, I've already had a couple of beers." And I thought, what? This was before I had a fancy office. And I thought, this guy is brazen. But actually now he's a real turnaround story. He's really, really, really good at what he did. But, sometimes it takes an open mind to spot that. So when you with the work that you do at the management lab, then is there kind of a certain type of business that obviously I know IT is your bag, but is there kind of a certain type of business that you're brought in to help, or a typical problem that you might see that that you're brought in to help, or is it all involving people? Is that really?
Well, so I think that the type of people who pick me is probably, I think they have six core challenges. It's mostly IT, but I do work with a company called Excelsior Mac, who are a multi-academy trust in Birmingham, who've got 4 schools in sort of deprived areas of Birmingham. And it's fantastic to work with them because they're doing something completely different. And I suppose I could say it doesn't have to be IT, it could be anybody. But the thing is, if you're going to put out your stall, where does my backstory play best? Well, it definitely plays best in technology firms looking to scale, searching for growth, technology firms who have already got amazing growth and are careering out of control and need help. Or often people ring me up and say, I've got a problem with sales, which is often not a sales problem. It's often a bigger, more holistic problem. Or they say, we need some help codifying our culture. And we know that from what we've read about you, Dom, that culture is one of your things. Or sometimes people say, they might be private equity backed, and so there's a sort of a 3 to 5 year timetable. Or they might be an entrepreneur who is thinking about planning an exit and wants to maximize, they sort of spent some years running their business almost as not quite as a lifestyle business, but not pedal to the metal. And now they're thinking, okay, in the next 5 to 10 years, maybe I want to sell it. So how do I maximize the value of my life's work? How do I tidy this story up and maybe get a bit more focused and get a bit more professional?
Sometimes that's a really difficult thing when you've been running a business for years. It's like, well, how do I leave? What is the end goal here? So I can imagine that's something that can seem overwhelming to a business owner, or being brought in and the business owner realizing that actually the business isn't worth as much as they thought it was, and there's holes that they need to fix in order to make that exit from the business.
Yes, there's both of those things. Are you prepared to go with the company or not? And if you're not going to go with the business, then we need a management team that can run it without you, and they need to have proved that before you sell it. It's not worth as much as they like. I mean, that's okay. As long as we've got a bit of time, we can probably get to the point where we can make it worth more money than they can spend in the rest of their lifetime. And so that's probably okay. But I think what's interesting is I say to people, working with me comes with a health warning, because it's a bit like sort of couch to 5K. You've got used to doing what you're doing. You're eating a bag of Prixels and drinking some beer or some wine and watching EastEnders every night. And I'm going to make you go and train. And, for this to work, you're going to have to go running in the rain and in the dark and all the times when you'd rather not be. So there's an element of training or teaching people new skills, which there can be some intellectual stimulation around. But actually, it comes down to doing the work. I'm going to make you consciously incompetent about some things that you didn't even know you weren't good at. And sometimes people go, yes, that's brilliant. That's what I want. When they all do. All clients who ever hired me have all said, yes, that's what I want. And then some of them don't do enough work. It's like buying a gym membership, but not going to the gym.
Yeah, it sounds great to have it. Yes, okay, I'm a member of a gym, but if you're never attending it, then you're not getting fit. So, yes, I agree with you. Now, tell me about the book. I like it. It's very to the point. I think it's definitely you from our time we've spent together. I'm just going to say it's my podcast, Fuck Plan B, how to scale your technology business faster and achieve Plan A. Now, This was, how long ago was this published?
Came out last year.
Last year. Oh, tell us about it. What made you, it's an achievement in itself to write a book. How did it come about, and what was you hoping to achieve, and what's been the reception of the book?
Well, the reception of the book's been really good. So what the tool set that I typically use is, they're from a book called Scaling Up by Vern Harnish. And that was one of his first book was called Rockefeller Habits. And that was sort of one of our core texts at Rackspace. And so, for 20 years, I've been a practitioner of Vern's tools. But I did want to be in a position where people got a sense of culture fit. And so, it has a provocative title. It's a sense of, these are the 10 things that I did at Rackspace and Peer 1 that made a difference. And so it helps people understand, well, maybe it helps them solve some problems that, you don't need to be a client. I'm delighted to help you. I think you said in the intro, I do a weekly newsletter. I'll write a blog every week. I do a podcast every week. I'm trying to help people demystify their business growth. And the book was an attempt to give people some more tools, give people some more advice, but also help people get an understanding of me so that you could decide whether, you're attracted or repelled by me. And I've had some clients that don't like swearing. And I've got a client at the moment who said, when I said to him, why did you pick me? He said, well, we interviewed 2 coaches and the other guy said he was against swearing in the workplace. So we decided, fuck him, we're going to hire you.
Well, I think it's important. And, even with the business I've grown, we're not everyone's cup of tea. We're very outspoken. What we put out on social media is sometimes on the line, but I'd rather have a voice than not. And we're not your cup of tea, fine, but at least we've got an audience that does like us. And I think by trying to appeal to everyone, sometimes you appeal to no one. You just blend into the background.
And do you know what? That, I think, is probably the biggest problem that clients come with. It's not what they think their problem is, but I think that if I look at all the clients that we've worked with, their positioning, they're not clear on which customer problem they're going to be number one in the world at. And nobody goes to the 3rd best Indian restaurant in Bristol on purpose, unless the first 2 are already full. And so you've got to work out what you're going to be number one in the world at. And that takes a little bit of effort.
It does.
And then once you've done that, though, everything else can fall into place.
And I think that's a really nice anecdote. So kind of finish the show on. Once again, I've overran Dominic, but I could talk to you for at least another hour, at least. There's so many unanswered questions. If people want to find out more about you, your weekly podcast, The Melting Pot, or The Management Lab, or they want to find the book, where can they go to?
Well, if you want to get the book for free, then come to monkhouseandcompany.com and subscribe to the newsletter, and we'll give you the book on PDF.
Wow.
To say thank you for subscribing. The Melting Pot, iTunes and all other good podcast locations called The Melting Pot with Dominic Monkhouse. And, you can email me off the website. You can contact me via LinkedIn. Delighted to chat with you. If there's anything I can do to help you, love to help you. And in fact, my favorite email came from a non-client. I've just done a deal raising some investment, but he emailed me to say, Dom, I've never given you a penny. I listened to your podcast, I read your newsletter, I scaled my business 20% last year. I've just sold a chunk of it to private equity. We're on a roll. Thanks for your help. And that is absolutely brilliant. I love that. That
makes it all worthwhile.
It does indeed. It's brilliant.
Fantastic. Dominic, thank you so much for joining me on this episode.
Jason, absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That was Dominic Monkhouse from the New Forrest. I'm Jason Connolly. This is the Career Success Podcast. Until next time, goodbye.